Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Bring Back the Love Conversations. I'm your host, AJ Throwback. And as always, this is a conversation about love, romance, and R&B, but it's going to go a little bit further than R&B this particular night because I have a young lady on a podcast tonight who I am so excited to have on. And when I tell you this sister has range when it comes to the music that she makes, when it comes to the music that she listens to, and how she expresses herself, how she creates. We're talking about a rapper, a singer, a songwriter, an award-winning songwriter. Anybody who's never heard of the Juno Awards is the Canadian equivalent of the Grammy. So that's how big time we are tonight with our special guest, none other than Q Benjamin. Thank you so much, my sister, for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, AJ. That was quite the introduction. I hope I live up to the expectations.
I am pretty sure you will, especially based on the conversations that you and I have had on Threads.
Yeah.
When it comes to the whole saying, like, if you're the smartest person in the room, you need to change your room.
Hmm.
When I stepped into your room, I knew I was changing the room and getting a little bit smarter with every interaction.
That's kind of you, AJ. Thank you. And I really appreciate your contributions to some of the dialogue on Threads too. I think, it's always the people who are open-minded and open to connecting as well that make microblogging apps like Threads a lot more worthwhile. So thank you.
Absolutely. And the thing that I love about Threads that is a little bit different than, and I felt like you could get it with Twitter as well, but I think because you have a little bit more room to express yourself in a few more characters, I think
Yes.
it kind of sort of
Yeah.
allows you the space to kind of really get off your thoughts the way that you really want to. And I just appreciate so many of the perspectives that you provide. Like, they're so layered. And honestly, that's one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to ask you to come on to the program, because like you have such great perspectives on so many different things, like on your faith in God, in music, in relationships, love, period, like just beyond the pale of what we're used to talking about relationships. And I think as I've been having a lot of conversations with people, I've been realizing that we kind of sort of have to get beyond those normal ways that we look at love and relationships and music, really. And the fact that you are so nuanced in your perspective, I had to have you on the show, so I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, AJ. It's a pleasure, and I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. So in our conversations, one of the things that you said, and you trust and believe you will not be the first person or the last person to say that you actually fell in love with hip hop
Yeah.
more than R&B.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, it just speaks a language. As much as R&B is my first love, it speaks a language that, or it speaks in a way that I think a lot of us who were born after a certain time, we just understand it. It speaks to us in a very specific way. So in terms of, like, I mean, you could say hip hop, R&B. I know that you have, like, your South Asian and Jamaican roots as well. Like, any bit of that kind of sort of putting that into the pot, so to say. What was some of the first memories that you have, like, listening to music where you really just fell in love with music?
Hip hop. And then because I'm half South Asian, so I am obviously I'm a millennial, right? And growing up in Canada, it was a lot of when hip hop kind of started becoming a thing, it was this is also information that I'm taking from my mom and my uncle and their generation, but it kind of started out as more of an underground thing. It wasn't this mainstream thing that everybody knew about and everybody listened to, right? And so in Canada, our Canadian rap and influences kind of fused in with New York sound and dance hall when hip hop first started coming up, right? And so my earliest memories of music that I listened to, and including hip hop, were a lot of fusion, right? So there would be like Bollywood, like Bhangra mixes, and mixed with like DMX was like my oldest memory. So
Mm.
it's like DMX mixed with like Bhangra, and just parties, a lot of parties at that time. And I'm like a baby, maybe like 3 or 4. And I can just remember doing Bhangra at these parties, but also like dancing to hip hop, knowing all the words. Yeah, like those are my earliest memories. And it was always just like more than one thing at one time, and mixes and scratching. And my family loves hip hop, even though they're South Asian. On my mom's side, we're Pakistani. So growing up, like that was the wave. And obviously living in Canada, where there's more of like a white Caucasian, however you want to call it, more of that kind of a population, it was kind of like you're picking sides, right? And like, if you like
Mm.
seasoned chicken, if you like seasoned beets, if you like a little bit of slap on the low end, like it's hip hop for you, right? And then I also listened to a lot of Bhangra too. And then later on, and those are kind of like my earliest memories of music. It was always, I can't remember a time when Bhangra wasn't part of the equation, but it was also simultaneously hip hop, not one or the other.
Yeah, and I like what you said in terms of, or I appreciate what you said in terms of, it wasn't just one thing or the other. It was like a blend of so
Yeah.
many different things,
Right,
and yeah.
again, even being Jamaican too, sorry, AJ, I forgot, dance hall, right? Like I
Yeah.
said, like dance hall came up with hip hop and vice versa,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Like in the 90s, it was like Murder She Wrote, and like my earliest memories even of dance hall come from my exposure to hip hop, and simultaneously Bhangra hip hop. And it's like it's just so me, it's ingrained into my blood, it's ingrained into my mind. And it's like, how could you not sing and rap when you're exposed to literally everything all at the same time?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad, and we're gonna we're gonna put a pin in that very thing that you just said. How
Sure,
could you not
sure.
sing and
Yeah,
rap
yeah.
at the same time? Because that's gonna circle perfectly around to something that I want to ask.
Sure,
Matter of fact, let's go ahead and get into it.
sure.
So forget putting a pin in it. So how how you said, how could you not sing and rap? So hip hop was more of like the thing that you kind of sort of gravitated towards with
Absolutely.
all of these different things,
Yeah.
Bhangra and dance hall and all of these things, and kind of sort of influencing and informing the way that you delivered hip hop.
Mhm.
So how did, as somebody who raps and sings, how did singing come into play in terms of you actually wanting to do it? In fact, how did both rap and singing come into play in terms of the desire to do it? Because it's one thing to admire it as an appreciator of the culture, as an
Right,
appreciator of music, period. But
right.
then to say, I actually want to make this myself. Like, this is something that speaks to me in terms of how I express myself. How did both rapping and singing come into play for you?
So for me, I actually started out singing. So when I won the Juno Award, it was for a song that I was singing for, or on. And it was the first song I actually ever co-wrote. I did that when I was just 18 or 17. I think I wrote that song, 17 or 18. It was the first song that I ever co-wrote. And I just always had this like it singing kind of just it came by accident. It was just again being exposed to so much music so constantly, and hearing it and singing along and listening to it. And like music was really my safe haven growing up. And it's my earliest memories of writing for expression was like a diary or a journal, and a lot of those were a little bit more on the side of like I don't want to sing this, right? And then I think when I was like 14, 15, like that was when I really started digging in the crates and knowing hip hop, and going through when YouTube first became a thing, going through the crates via YouTube, I guess, is like would have been my version of it,
Yeah.
right? Even though I started out singing, it was just because that's all I could do, but I wanted to make music. And I always knew from when I started singing, I was like, I want to rap, I want to rap, I want to rap. And it was actually very hard for me to learn how to rap because
Mm,
I didn't know anything about structure. I didn't know anything about like, I just knew melody, like how I could freestyle on a beat, right? But like,
yeah,
how do I know what the structure is? How do people structure
yeah,
rap? Right. And I had always written poetry, and like it's very different to translate that. It was a process for me, and I really had to sit down and learn. I put in a lot of work, and my biggest thing was like, it was driven by a fear of never being able to express myself how I'm feeling it. I'm also a Gemini. To this day, my friend group compares me to Tupac when it comes to expression because it's just so nuanced, right? People often
mhm,
say like he's a hypocrite, but like I don't see it like that. I think if you're a human being, you are a hypocrite. If there's duality in your expression, that's just raw humanity. That's what it is to be a human, right? I
yeah,
think sometimes you use the word nuance, and I love that, but it's funny that like my normal is other people's nuance. It's also acknowledging and knowing like just my existence is an anomaly, and so my art is as well, just because that's who I am, and your artistry should reflect your reality, right? And I
yeah,
think mine does. So yeah, that's a
yeah,
great question.
yeah. Like, I mean, and that's a fantastic answer because the fact of the matter is, even including, but not limiting it to the
Yeah,
fact that you have a mixed heritage.
right.
The fact of the matter is, every last person on the face of this earth has different layers to them, whereas they're not just one thing. And I think that's really the theme
Yeah,
of this conversation tonight, or it's
absolutely. Yeah,
becoming the theme of tonight's conversation, is that none of us are just one thing. None of us are, especially those of us who are creators, we always somehow veer into different forms of creation. Like, I know for myself, when I first started off in creating, it wasn't music, it was art. Like, I used to
right.
draw,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so and I mean, I was heavy
right,
in that for probably the first 10 years that I considered myself a creative. Then it
right,
evolved into poetry. Then it
right,
evolved into rap. Then it
right.
evolved into production. Like, we just constantly evolve over time, and these different ways of how we express ourselves, they give us something different. So, in saying that, what does singing give you in terms of creating? Because I mean, you said a lot of what rapping does for you.
Mhm.
What do I mean, you can kind of sort of, if you want to expound on the rapping part of it, what does singing give you in comparison and contrast with rapping? And what does rapping give you in comparison and contrast to singing?
That's a great question. AJ, your questions are really great. Thank you for taking
Thank
the
you.
time to really do your research. I can tell that you really looked into things and you really research. But yeah, these are great questions. I would
Thank you.
honestly say I think singing allows me to be vulnerable. That's always something that I've really struggled with. Again, that's a cultural thing, right? Like there's not a lot of room to be vulnerable. It's not always safe to do so, right? And I think when I'm singing, I can express from my heart. When I'm rapping, I can express from my mind or somewhere in between,
Mhm.
right? And it's comfortable for me. Nobody likes a conversation where it's all just like, here's how I feel. This is what I'm feeling. Here's it's a lot. It makes you feel like you're open to attack, right? And I
Yeah.
think for me, I always say I'm equally emotional and I'm equally logical, right? And
Mhm.
so I think just like riding that line, if it's a song where I'm feeling a little bit more slow and like I need to really like process things, or just somewhere in between, where it's like a slower frame of thought. And it's just everything is like life or everything is like a dance, right? Like what kind of conversation am I having here? I think the main thing singing gives me is the ability to be vulnerable. And to slow things down, to slow down my mind. As creatives, our minds go a mile a minute, right? Like
Mhm.
we can be and faster than my mouth can talk sometimes is how my brain is going, right? So it's just like singing allows me to slow down, right? Sometimes it's vulnerability, but sometimes it's just like this the slowness of one thought in the paragraph, or in the whole mess of mayhem of whatever a situation is, in the chaos, and it's holding on to that, and it's really picking that apart slowly, right? And I think too, even when it comes to melody, there's vulnerability there too, right? When we're speaking, you can hear in somebody's tonality, you can hear in their cadence and how long they hold words for. You can really hear how they might be feeling. If their voice wavers, are they, on the verge of tears? Is it a little bit more vulnerable? Are they pulling from the heart, or is it just a mind thing? Is it just pure intellect? I think singing really, and I don't want to discount it. I think this is why I sing too. This is why I love music in general. Even I do love R&B as well. It's just like it's soul, right? And it's sometimes you don't even need to say the words per se. It's not always about songwriting, and that's what I've learned as somebody who loves hip hop and rap, right? Is like it even rapping allowed me to have a newfound appreciation for singing, because
Mhm.
in the melody and in the delivery of a melody, sometimes all of the words that are there are all you need. It's not about what you're actually saying, it's about how it feels and the soul in that. Does that answer your question?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the vulnerability, the soul, and how you can kind of sort of extend certain thoughts, extend certain feelings
Yeah.
through singing versus rap where it really is. And I really like the breakdown, like where it's like singing is from the heart. Both can be both draw from both the heart and the mind, but like
Absolutely.
I can relate to the whole thing, whereas like with rap, it's a little bit more thought put into rap,
Yeah,
but
and I
there still is a layer of emotion put into it.
Yeah. And I think too with rap is like sometimes you get different things different ways with rap, right? Whereas like I said with Pac, right? Is like his beats were so soulful, right? Even Nas, like the beats, when you listen to something like Jay's Song Cry, it's just is different.
Yeah.
Or that one track, I'm thinking it's Beanie Siegel. Help me out.
Ooh, which one? Which one? This is
I can feel
that's
it
my guy right there.
in the air.
Feel
Feel
it in
it
there.
in the
Yeah.
air. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Beats, right? Like that's where like a lot of the soul would come from. And that's why I think hip hop is like the how it's comes from samples too, and like it just introduced that soul, and it's like I don't have to worry about getting the feelings right, because when I was younger I always really struggled to even put my finger on like what is the emotion that I'm feeling, right? It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until with maturity I was able to be like, this is exactly what that feeling is and why it is. I couldn't always put my finger on it, so it was like, I don't know, but this beat feels like that, this melody feels like it's already there, right? So now I can just talk through it. And, the duality of that in itself is just, it makes so much room and creates so much space for accuracy of expression.
I love that accuracy of expression.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the duality, because that's another thing. And it's very interesting to kind of sort of that you've peeled back some more layers to who you are, specifically when you were talking about the fact that you, like Pac, a Gemini, you know what I'm saying? Like that whole dynamic going on, that you're not just one thing or the other, it's both and then some.
Yeah.
Um and then what you said also about the samples
Mhm.
that are often featured in hip hop, like you're talking a lot of R&B, soul, jazz samples that really are the foundations. And I mean, you have like other samples
And
as
like
well, but like,
funk, right? And Motown, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Real like vocals, soul,
Mhm.
disco, like that's music I grew up on too, right? So it's like even just to love those genres, there's just a different feeling to it. You take something from the 70s and the 80s and you put it into the 90s, it's
Yep.
gonna have that same vibe, it's gonna have that same experience, it's gonna have the same spirit of that time, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and you are leading me right into where I'm going perfectly. It's a perfect segue because hip hop, R&B, hip hop soul, hip hop funk, hip hop jazz, like all of these things are like so intrinsically linked with one another. Whether you're talking samples, whether you're
Yes.
talking how things are branded under
Yeah.
the urban contemporary umbrella, whether
Mhm.
you're talking about how often many of these genres, specifically hip hop across the aisle with a lot of the genres that we're naming, they've reached across the aisle to collaborate with one another.
Right.
So, like, how do you expanding a little bit more? How do you perceive the correlation between hip hop and R&B, hip hop funk, hip hop soul, hip hop jazz, like all of these different genres, especially thinking just specifically about like hip hop and R&B, how these are two of the most, or they've become two of the most prominent genres in Black American
Mhm.
music culture specifically. Like,
Right.
how do you perceive the correlation between the genres, and how do you feel like it really kind of sort of informs what you do as a creative?
That's a great question. I do want to be careful about, I want to say something before I lead into my answer because I'm also Canadian. So I want to be respectful of, like genres and the popularization and what my perception is. I just want to note that it might be a little different and also just have the disclaimer that I am Canadian, just out of
Absolutely.
respect and love for the culture. But I think that it's like you said, AJ, right? Like they're all interconnected. They're so closely interwoven, right? And I think there's obviously been such a progression over time, right? There's been such a progression, and I think it's hard to escape the roots, but my biggest thing is, the earlier hip hop influences and all of the Motown influences, the samples, I think that's when it had the most soul, right? I think with
Mhm.
anything over time, anything's going to get a little bit diluted from its original way of being, if you will. So I think my perception is just that they're all interconnected. I don't think it's possible. It's like when people say, I've seen a meme flying around and it's like, I want a 90s R&B type love. Y'all could keep the other stuff. And I'm like, hey man, I want the Motown type love. Where it came from. Give me like early Aretha, give me like
Mm.
Diana Ross. Like I don't want it's funny, like the thought process sometimes, or because people will be like, nah, I want to people, it's like 90s is the original. It's like, no, baby, that's not the original.
That's right. School them.
You're
School
diluting it already. I
them.
don't want that. I want like where it comes from,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like so yeah, I don't know. Like Isley Brothers or Isley Brothers?
Isley. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, that's the first thought that I had, but I hesitated to say it because I was like, I don't know if
Yeah.
my age is showing. I've only ever seen it written. Nobody's ever said it.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah,
I'm a huge Isley Brothers fan. Like that's like probably
you
my
know,
second favorite band of all
yeah,
time. Yeah.
that's amazing. But
Yeah.
like, and I can see why. So for me, it's like it's all interconnected, right? And I think that's a hard question to answer just because, you know, it's not something it's not something anybody really intentionally thinks about.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's how I perceive it, is just earlier the better, earlier the more pure, less diluted. And
Hmm.
I think, as much as we have to kind of live with the times too, right? And kind
Yeah.
of just be rooted and grounded in reality at the same time. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a lot of it's funny because even though for anybody watching this,
Mhm,
the period that really kind of sort of inspired like the project that I'm putting out
mhm,
is actually the late 80s and the 90s. But my favorite era of music has been the 70s because I just felt like, and I remember Andre 3000 saying something along these lines where as he felt like the most organic period in music was the 70s
mhm,
because if you listen to a lot of that music, a lot of it was just so raw. You know, the emotions were
It
raw.
was.
The
Yep.
thoughts that were coming out was raw. Like, I mean, even and you mentioned it earlier, you mentioned disco. Like when you
Mhm.
think about the beginnings of disco, the beginnings of disco can be traced to 70s Philly soul music,
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
Gamble and Huff, to the South Soul Orchestra. Like all of these different acts that they don't necessarily talk about in terms of being the foundation of disco,
Yep.
but that, you know, kind of four on the floor, how they like they talk about that, like that energy that comes
Yeah.
from like that movement, because they could give you ballads, but then they could give you these songs that, like, I mean, by the time if you went in with an afro, you might not come out with your afro looking the same way that it, you know, that it looked when you went in. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? But and that was a different type of love at that time. That
Right.
was a different type of expression at that time that I feel like informs, like you said, informs so much of what we appreciated and loved so much in the 90s, but it had to come from somewhere, you
Right.
know? Yeah.
Absolutely. And like again, that four on the floor, like disco maybe transitioned to house too, right? And all of it
Mhm.
was interconnected. The thing that I it just reminds me like the thing that I really admire and almost envy the most about like the time of the 90s was that everything was came at the same time. People were
Yes.
listening to house, they were listening to Black Box,
Yes.
they were
Yes.
listening to CC Peniston, but then it was also like they was listening to Biggie too. They was listening to Craig
Mhm.
Mack, right? They were listening to
Mhm.
Group Home. They were listening to Mobb Deep. You know, good music was good music. We're missing that now. It's like
Yeah.
it's either one genre or the other. It's not all coming out at the same time, and people don't rock with all
Yeah.
the genres anymore. And that's something that's so hard to like artistically cope with as an
Yes.
adult artist in this climate of music socially and creatively. It's very hard to cope with because even growing up with like 80s music, like how do we have these chats without talking about Michael and his influence, even though like
Yes.
yeah, hip hop, but like 80s came out of that too. Yeah, Michael was black, but like all the music, it was just great music. Or other artists, it's like most people only listen to one genre or have only ever listened to one genre. And you know, I try to be nice, but you know, you could tell, we could tell we don't listen to one genre. And if you
Yes.
can't hear the similarities between like country and like early hip hop in the 90s, just in terms of being an observer to a story, somebody's life and lifestyle, and the way that they're articulating it, I would argue that like, are you really even a student of this stuff? I would
Right.
argue
Yeah.
that.
And I would too, because what's interesting about what you're saying is that like we have a lot of the same trajectory in terms of how we receive music, how we interpret music, what music speaks to us. Because when I
Right.
was growing up, like I didn't just listen to R&B or hip hop. Like I listened to soft rock, I listened to hard rock,
See,
I
that was
listened to classical music.
that's your era too.
Yeah,
Y'all did.
yeah, 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 exactly,
I
exactly. Like
admire that so
y-
much.
and you nailed it when you said like we were listening to stuff like black. It's funny that you mentioned Black Box, because I swear every time everybody comes on, you would swear it's 1990 all over again, because I get excited as if that song is brand new. And the thing
Slap
is like
too. Slap too, right?
yeah, yeah,
Or
like and
what is it? Another night, another dream, but always
yes,
you keep
yes.
the vision. How? Like that's what it you. Those are vocals. Like I
Yeah,
see, like I'm getting so excited, but it's like it's exciting because it feels something. It's party. Like you
yes,
have a party vibe here. You got
yes.
another vibe here, which might, but like it was all interconnected. Now you got to go to one specific place to hear one type of music, and then it's
Right.
like you want to hear rap and it's like one kind of crowd, and it's just like it's too much, without getting into it too much. It's like, when you get a little more mature and you pretty, like there's certain spaces you don't want to be in. But it's like I want to hear some hood stuff, but like
Yeah,
I don't want to be in this crowd. And it's tough because it's like
yeah.
the party's just not jumping anymore like it was.
They really aren't.
It's not.
That's That's one of the biggest reasons why I don't party but so often, unless it's maybe a house party, or
Yeah.
unless it's somebody that I know who knows how to curate like really layered playlists, because a lot of people that I know, like they listen to hip hop as much as they listen to jazz, as much as they listen to house, as much as they listen to funk or soul, or all of these different genres where it's not just one thing or the other, or you got to pick one side or the other. Like, I didn't grow up like that. Like, in fact,
Yeah.
and this kind of segues into my next question. I think about the fact, like, when I first started watching BET
Mhm.
back in like the late 80s, early 90s, even before I started watching, I kind of sort of went back and started looking at some of the stuff they used to play.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, I watched something where they played this rock band. It's an all black rock band from
Okay.
Memphis, Tennessee,
Okay.
named Xavion.
Okay.
And the moment I heard the music, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this sounds great!" Like, it sounded like almost like who can I think of at that time? Maybe, I wouldn't say Bon Jovi, but maybe kind of sort of like somewhere between Bon Jovi and what's my man, Billy Idol, somewhere between, or no, not even Van Halen. I would say more Van Halen.
Okay.
Black rock band, Memphis, Tennessee. They put out this album, I want to say it was 1984, and I had never heard the song before. But the whole point is BET was not just playing R&B. They weren't just playing hip hop. They were
Mm.
playing black
See?
rock bands. They were playing alternative R&B bands. They
Yeah.
were playing house. They were playing jazz. Like, they played everything that was us. And growing up in that era, it really made me appreciate not just like the different types of music that were out there, but the different types of music we could create as black people that
Yeah.
weren't just the ones that felt comfortable, so to say, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but it also attributes to the era I grew up in terms of how I receive music. Like I said, BET, the different programs BET had, the radio stations that we listened to. It was a wide range of black experiences or black expressions that
Right.
made me really appreciate who we were. Of course, like, that's at a time when like tapes were popping. Like, you crack open a tape, you crack open a CD, you're going through the liner notes. You know what I'm saying? Like, seeing who produced what, where was it recorded, who's the engineer, learning about that type of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
that's the way that I receive music, that shaped
Right.
how I appreciate music.
Right.
For you,
Mhm.
and specifically because I mean, you mentioned like you growing up in Canada.
Right.
I'm sure there's a slightly different experience in
Mhm.
terms of like how you receive music, but similar in a lot of ways. And being, I'm assuming, younger than I am.
Yeah.
Um, I never like to ask a woman's her age or assume what a woman's age is. So I'm
Fair.
just going to assume
Yeah.
you're younger than me.
Oh,
but
yes.
but like, just based on your experience, like, how did you receive music, and what were the different ways that you got music that shaped, because I mean, you clearly have like a high appreciation for music.
Yeah.
What were the ways that you received it, and how did those ways shape how you appreciate it?
When you say received, what do you mean by that?
Like radio, like who, like the radio stations you may have listened to, maybe TV programs you watch. You mentioned YouTube, how that was your digging through the crates type
Mhm.
of deal. Like, those different ways of discovering music, listening to music, watching music. Like, how did those ways kind of shape how you appreciate it?
So early on, it was tapes, right? So, and again, like I feel like that like is makes me look extra old, but I'm not that. It wasn't. It
It's all
was
right. It's all right.
the plastic tapes. Um, and again, like it was a lot of Urdu music, and that's a language that is spoken primarily in Pakistan. And my grandpa used to give me like Christian Urdu tapes, and we would
Mhm.
like I would play those and listen to those, study them. And then quickly after that, it was like the Discman, right? So I received music that way. So my uncle used to have those, like one of the computers, and that could burn music. So he'd be like, "What do you want on it?" Or he would just burn me random ones. Right?
Yeah.
So I think receiving music through YouTube opened up the experience for me, right? Another aspect of the story being told and seeing it in video and seeing the cadence, seeing the conviction with which lyrics were being spoken and rapped. So I think for me, there's so many different avenues of how I receive music, from tapes to Discmans, burning music, burning CDs, YouTube, and the video aspect changed things for me in a big way. I've always felt like I was an observer to the culture of country music too, right? And so I would watch CMT, which was like country music television here, a lot of love songs. And I think that was always really missing, because sometimes it was just like, by the time my generation came and it was BET, it's a lot of like unrequited love, or it's just like kind of making no distinction between lust and love, so to speak, right? And so it was nice to kind of hear that like vulnerability from country music and watching that via CMT for me.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take in
Mhm.
terms of I think also, like you said, your generation,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how the shift in R&B started to kind of sort of happen
Hmm.
with, like you said, unrequited love, not drawing the distinction between lust and love in a lot of songs. Because I'm not gonna lie, like when it got to a certain part of like the 90s, the 2000s, there
Yeah.
was a lot of music at that time that, like, that's when you started really kind of sort of seeing the shift. Like it
Mhm.
wasn't the same
See,
level.
that's why we're all screwed now.
Look,
We're so screwed.
people don't wanna admit it because
No, they
you have so many people from the 90s, from the 80s, or that grew up during those times that don't wanna admit that not all that 90s music was good for us. Like, it was a lot
don't.
of it that was, but
Wasn't.
a lot of it that was like, "Okay, we're kinda going to a dark zone here," you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, "What's going on?"
You know
You
what,
know?
AJ? One of the things that you said was talking about kind of like the nuance and how your generation appreciated nuance and really like embraced it, right? And just like
Mhm.
the different genres, and everybody made different genres. I think one of the biggest things about my generation is like people pick sides so much so, and especially when it comes
Yeah,
to like, oh no, this is black, so this is what I'm gonna do. It's almost like people think blackness is one thing, our
right,
own people, right? There's
right.
lack of
Mhm.
nuance in even how we identify as Black. My experience, especially on social media platforms, and I speak about it very often, is like the pushing into like, no, you get forced. And it's like, if you're mad because you chose the side that you don't feel accurately represents you, that's on you. But that's
Right.
not what I'm going to do. Right. And so I think that this is part of what we see, I think, socially, right? This is the part where I think reality does reflect art and vice versa, where that comes out in our music, that comes out in our entertainment, right? I don't think a
Yeah.
lot of people are themselves. And I always say, even when it comes to my mix, I'm both and I'm neither, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting about it is, like, in the midst of you talking, like, what I was thinking
Mhm,
was the difference between high text high context culture and low context culture.
mhm,
When you operate in low context culture, it's all about things.
mhm, mhm,
Like you draw your identity from things, and you can even kind of sort of boil that down to what society tells you in terms of what
mhm.
you should be
Yes,
racially, culturally.
yes,
You know,
yes.
like if that's your identity, you let somebody else define you.
I said this on Threads the other day too, AJ. 110%. And it's like
Yeah,
my biggest thing too is, and I think too, because I'm mixed, because I come from a different background, because I've been so exposed into South Asian culture, and because I identify differently, I can see a lot of things objective, which is why I say
yeah.
like I'm both and I'm neither, right?
Mhm.
Because the biggest pushback I get is when people try and say things like, "Oh, well, white people see you as okay, so if you're from Korea and white people see a Chinese person, does that make a Korean person Chinese?
Right.
It doesn't make any
That part.
sense. And I
Yeah.
only hear this flawed rhetoric and this flawed logic from people who are supposed to understand and who are supposed to be informed on race. And
Mhm.
it's concerning because it's very ignorant. It's ignorant logic, and it's ignorant in how you also view yourself, because so what? If a white
Right.
person views me as whatever, if somebody's going to racially profile me, they're going to do that. And that's fine. But that doesn't change who I am or what my identity is culturally, socially, all of these different things. Right. And the nuance that's within that. And it
Right.
shouldn't change other people's either. But I think, if other people make that choice, that's your choice to make. But that doesn't mean that it's off the table for me to identify my Blackness with nuance.
That's right. That's right. And everything that you've said in this entire conversation is really a masterclass in what high context culture is, because you talked about family, you talked about nationality, you talked
Mm-hmm,
about your heritage, you
mm-hmm.
talked about things that are of real importance.
Right.
But it's like you said, I'm all of these things and I'm none of these things.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because it's like you can't box me into just even those things, because you've had so many different experiences in life. I mean, you talked about all the different types of music that you appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you hear the whole thing when they say that, Black people are not a monolith, it's like we're
Mm-hmm.
not.
We're not.
Like
But it's like our own people, and often the people who say those things that treat everybody like they're a monolith. So it's
exactly.
a very frustrating thing, because it's like, man, like y'all just, a lot of people just don't get it. Even people who say they get it. And I think, again, my biggest issue with like the fallout from 2020 and a lot of the race conversations and context is a lot of people are not educated on what it means to be Black, or what it means to have nuance and identity and what that looks like. And I think one of the biggest things I noticed as a Canadian is like a lot of context is very informed by what it means to be Black American, and that's
Mhm.
not what it is in Canada. A lot of us are from the Caribbean. A lot of our
Yeah.
parents are from the Caribbean, so our Blackness
Mhm.
is very different. It looks
Yes.
different, it feels different, it comes from a different place. When you look at artists even that come out of here, Drake, Tory Lanez, I think Tory Lanez is one of the greatest artists of our generation, and I say
Mhm.
that also separating whatever the drama is, right?
Yeah.
Music and talent and skill only is what I'm speaking on.
Oh
And I
yeah.
think honestly, that's because we grow up with so many different musical influences. He did an
Yep.
80s album. He does, dance hall inspired tracks, right? But
Mhm.
we speak very differently up here. And so I think my biggest thing, and even when you look at hip hop, even in a UK context, like drill is mad. It's crazy, right? And
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
again, it's the nuance to the Blackness. Because when I speak to people from the UK, they don't have a problem perceiving me. They call, in Jamaican culture, they call somebody like me coolie, is like the dialect, which is like Indian and Jamaican together, right? You're like
Mhm.
Jamaican Indian, right? And it's a
Yeah.
little different because I'm literally half South Asian, but like at the same time, it's the same thing, right? And like
Yeah.
people perceive that, right? And so I think my biggest issue from the fallout from 2020 is like we look at people, and I think a lot of organizations and a lot of white people look at a random Black person, and it's like an extension of tokenism where it's like, well, this person's Black, so they should know. But the reality is not every Black person actually understands what it means to be Black or race, or that Black people are not a monolith, and to be able to perceive and understand somebody else who does identify with a nuanced Blackness.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. We get to school tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Because when I say and this is why I wanted you to come on, because you have like the way that you receive like, or the way that you have experienced the world and the things that you've seen from a personal perspective and an artistic perspective and a spiritual perspective is different than a lot of people. But it's one of those things where it's like I'm just listening along with the conversation. It's like, but it's not much different than if people really bust it down
Yeah.
and realize like we're not that much different. It doesn't matter whether we're like, what I'm
Yeah.
saying, 100% Black or mixed or whatever it might be. And none of us are really, those of us in America,
That's the
none of
thing.
us are really 100% black anyway.
That's
You
the
know what I'm
thing.
saying?
Thing. And
let's
I
let's
think
keep it real.
and that's why it's frustrating is because like most of y'all are mixed and not
Exactly.
knowing what you're mixed with doesn't change the fact that you're mixed. Sometimes I see
Right.
commentary on socials where it's like somebody hyper light skin with like different features even, right? Like, and it's
Mhm.
like, and that doesn't change that. Yes, like you can be actually full black and have different, what's classified as different in terms of features or skin, but also like you can sometimes see that people are very clearly mixed, but they're angry at people for asking them if they're mixed with something. Like, baby, just because you don't know, that doesn't change that you very well might be mixed, right? And
Exactly.
I don't know what those ancestry.com type quizzes do or if they're accurate, but at the end of the day, like you gotta, sometimes it's just something that we have to accept as a result of Black history, is like just because you don't know doesn't make you any less mixed. And I understand that frustration, and it's a complex and very sensitive topic to speak on, because I think when we speak on identity, you're actually shaking the foundation of somebody's whole purpose on earth and their whole existence,
Right.
right? And so
Yeah.
I'm careful with how I speak on it. And I just say at the end of the day, there is some level of choice within identity, right? And like,
Yes.
it's totally cool if you say something like, hey man, I could be black, but like, or I could be mixed, but I just say black because I'm not sure what it is. But like, it's that accountability, it's that responsibility, I think, in that. And like, a lot of people don't like accountability, kind of like what
Right.
you implied earlier, right? People don't want
Yeah.
to admit certain things. And that's okay. Like, you can't say that we're a marginalized people as a result of social factors and all of these different things and history, and then not say like, hey man, like there's might be some things I don't know here, so I could be wrong, but this is what I'm choosing. That's totally fine to say and be confident in, because even with that, I think there's power in that, because you can define your own identity, like identify based on who you are as a person and your values. And those are things that are important to me, and kind of how I feel I've been forced to identify with other people. What are your values? And are you going to accept and hear me when I tell you what my experience is, and embrace and acknowledge that it's different because it's me? And I
Mhm.
think that comes with being seen, that comes with being having an open mind. And I don't typically just, people say not all skin folk is kinfolk, and like,
Yeah.
that's usually in context of people who are sellouts or whatever. But I see it more as like, nah, like skin folk to me is people who's going to be like, oh no, Q is half this. She identifies differently, but no,
That's
she
right.
Q is who she is, and like outside of that, you don't understand me, and I don't care to rock with you. You're not part of my crew, or you're not part of, what I consider to be my kinfolk. So I
That's
think
real.
this is just, it's important. It's very important to me. And I think there's a big piece of this stuff that's on us to define, and that's on us to even understand, so we can articulate it, right? Because it's only going to get worse, so to speak.
Yes.
Everybody's mixed now.
Yeah. And what's interesting about what you're saying is that it ended up being an inadvertent perfect segue into
Your next question.
yes. And this kind of helps to transition into the something new love part of
Sure.
the conversation, because you clearly are somebody who has a certain respect and a certain love for yourself in terms of all the layers of who you are, not
Mhm,
just one or not just two. Like, you have so many different pieces to who you are. And I mean, whether you're talking about your heritage, whether you're talking about your artistry, whether you're talking about your faith in God, because you are very, one of the things that I appreciate about you is that you're very clear about your faith in God. It's not something you beat people over the head with or anything like that, like some people, frankly, that I see on threads. But like, you clearly are a woman of faith,
mhm,
and you're clearly a very introspective person. You're somebody who really, you analyze yourself, you analyze the way that you think about things, the way that you feel about things, where you are at this particular stage of your life.
mhm,
So kind of sort of bringing new love and the way that, and sometimes like that terminology can come out and people automatically think relationships. It can
mhm,
be friendships. It can be self-love. It could be even the way that you approach your art.
Mm.
Like, what are some new ways that you've learned to love yourself? Um, your new ways that you've learned to love the people in your life, new ways that you've learned to love God, new ways that you've learned to love your craft. Like, what are some of the something news, so to say, that you've seen in your life in the past, maybe the past couple of years as compared to like when you were younger?
I think for me, my biggest thing is over the past 3 years, I've learned what it really is to walk with God in relationship and to really put God at the center of everything. In the past, I didn't always do that. I think in a big way, I was a compromising Christian. And again, I think that's largely even cultural too. I think we all claim to be Christian. You would see, rappers with the chain on talking about all kind of debauchery, but
That
like,
part.
well, and again, like I think these are all things that sometimes influence your faith or influence or inform kind of like what you think is acceptable and what's not. And I think it's all encompassing for me because without God is the ultimate creator, right? And now I'm trying to kind of redefine that new love even for my artistry. Like, what does it look like to rap and sing and to look like myself? And
Mm,
when people expect a certain thing from you, when it comes to subject matter or when it comes to an image, I think the biggest thing is like, how can I express myself now? And also, like, is my mission as a creative and as an artist, is it expressing myself, or is it getting across a message? If I say I believe in Christ and I go by the Bible, or I do my best to use that as a standard, even though we all fall short, I think, it's some of these things where it's like, how am I loving my neighbor? What influence am I putting out? What message am I putting out? Am I contributing to the enemy's message or to the light's message, right?
mm,
And I used to always hear it. It used to drive me insane as an artist. I hated it so much as a youngin. People used to say, well, you're either doing it for God or you're doing it for the other side. And I'd be like, okay, like auntie, Well, it always sounded like this antiquated perspective that existed just to put me in a box, right? And it's funny because
mm,
we're talking nuance, but when it comes to light or dark, there is not really there isn't nuance. There
yeah,
isn't.
yeah,
Right. And so I think navigating that, I think there's levels, right? There's levels to spiritual maturity. You can have all the skill and talent in the world, but like, what are you really doing? Right. And there's an accountability on a spiritual side, and there's an accountability to even what we do as Black people or people of color, however you choose to identify. In this thing, even post BLM, you don't be out here talking about, your people shouldn't be stereotyped, and then you're sitting here adhering to stereotypes. That, again, certain subject matter, you're talking about all kinds of things toward your own women and hypersexualizing them in media, but then you're
yep,
pro-Black. No, you're not. Like, it's annoying after a while. I think loving myself is coming to all of these realizations and then trying to figure out like how I can also, again, accurately creatively depict that as an artist and the growth that I've had, right? And so
yeah,
my last project, I think after
mhm,
that period of working on that project, I did a lot of self-work. I did a lot of therapy. I did a lot of self-reflection. There was a lot of things I wasn't proud of that I was doing, saying, where I was in my life, and knowing that I was better than that and the standard should be higher for me, but I was kind of like compromising. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of a lot of the stuff that's happening culturally now, because I think the climate, even in entertainment, is going to completely change based on the things that are going on now, right? Because
yeah,
a lot of a lot of these specific social injustice, a lot of the women specific or assault specific social injustice things happening in hip hop now, they haven't happened before, right?
right,
And our space needs it. Our
yes,
space needs it. And
yes,
I don't even say that lightly. I think, what I'm hearing, AJ, is a lot of people talking about like, oh, but they didn't get this guy and they're not getting the white. Who cares?
Ugh,
Who cares?
I
It
hate it.
doesn't matter because like let them get them whenever their time is coming. Right now, it's hip hop's time. And
Right,
accountability is a thing, and you will be accountable regardless of whether you're hiding or not. It's refreshing to see a lot, just like the accountability and the reassurance that like everybody has to be accountable for their actions and behavior at some point. And music isn't one to take lightly because this is an area that has a lot of influence. So
yeah, yeah, and when you pull into it, the spiritual aspect of it, like, it's a space that and I'm not sitting here saying like everything has to be gospel music or
Yeah,
everything has to be
yeah.
Christian music, but
No.
there has to be a level of light
Mhm.
that's put into whatever music that you make. And not just the music that you make, but the lifestyle that you live behind the music that you make. And again, it's not going to be nobody's perfect. Everybody falls short.
Of
I
course.
fall short. You've admitted that you fall
Yep.
short just like we all do,
Mhm.
But it's what is the intention
Mhm.
behind what you're doing? One of the things you said is like, and it was so powerful that you have some people out here who claim to be pro-black.
Mhm.
And I think I might have mentioned it to you in conversation about something, but my wife always says this,
Mm.
specifically when it comes to black men in power, a lot of black men in power, is
Say it.
that
Say
they
it.
don't
Say
they
it.
don't want equality. They
Nope.
just want to trade places with their oppressor.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the problem
Yep.
with a lot of the spaces that we're in,
Yes.
but it's also part of the reckoning that's going on,
Mhm. Amen. It
you
is.
know?
Amen. It's not cute anymore to objectify women. It's not cute to act in a certain way. When you're young, you can even talk about you being immature, immaturity. And even that's something I noticed where people will label a lot of men as immature to hide behind literal manipulative and abusive behavior. But it's like,
Yep,
no, call it what it is. That
yep.
man is 26, 27, 28, 29. You are manipulative. You're an
Yeah,
abuser. You know what
yeah,
I mean? That's
yeah,
assault.
yeah.
Let's call it what it is. That's mental abuse. So I think
Mhm.
a lot of these things, I saw a thread the other day where somebody said, I think her username is uppity negress.
Okay.
I don't know. Think that's what it is. Well,
Yeah,
and her take was so good. And she said something to the effect of, I think we've gotten so used to protecting men from the consequences of things they did not, Black men from the consequences of things they did not do, that we're forgetting what it means to hold them accountable for what they did do. And now,
mhm,
again, part of
mhm.
that reckoning is like, yo, you can't have it both ways. You want to talk
Right.
injustice, you got to talk about the things that you're perpetuating as well. And I
Yep.
think that's what's upsetting people. It's upsetting even a lot of Black women too. And you can tell in our culture, the level of internalized misogyny from Black women is
Yes.
disheartening. I think for somebody like me, separating that and my womanhood from my Blackness and having the nuance has it's caused me to look at things with a little bit more of an open mind and a little bit more objectivity, because I'm able to separate those things when I look at like Black masculinity versus Black femininity, and then also seeing that mine is a little bit different because of my cultural background. I'm able to kind of look at this and say like, hey man, like, this is two very different things. I can separate my Blackness when it comes to issues of masculinity and femininity. And I think people need to,
Yeah.
because when we look at our culture, being that it is so informed by a lot of our entertainment and musical influences, it's very much not conducive to femininity in itself, right?
Right.
It's not a safe space. And these are things that we need to talk about and hold people accountable for, because quite honestly, it's a hindrance, and
Yes.
I'm sick of it.
That makes two of us. And what's interesting about how this conversation has unfolded is that the new love
Yeah.
is really when it comes down to it, we have to love ourselves as a people differently than we've been doing. We
Yeah.
have to step outside of these comfort zones that either mainstream culture has created for us and we've bought into,
Yeah.
or we've created for ourselves, maybe part due to what mainstream culture has told us we need to do, and part like what we've added on to that, on top of that, because it's always something that gets added on regardless of who affects it. Because the thing is, when it comes down to it, we are the ones who are responsible for breaking whatever cycles as a people that we are in. And it's a matter of saying, okay, this is what we've been used to, but this isn't right. Like I think for me, it's part like I've never really agreed with misogyny, the misogyny that's been pervasive in hip hop culture. But to say that I've never been a participant of
Mhm.
it, I mean, in it would be a lie.
Right.
You know what I'm
You
saying?
know, and myself included, AJ. Like,
Yeah.
none of us are exempt, and a lot of it is, like, there's always a saying too for, like, personal development. In the world of personal development, people say it's not sometimes it's not your fault that certain things happen to you, but it's your responsibility now to fix those things and to find solutions, right? So,
Absolutely.
unfortunately, I think we've all contributed. I mean, like I said, my last project is, like, there's a lot of that. Even, like, women going at other women, you know what I'm saying? And, like,
Mhm.
the it's hard to separate because there is a competitive element to hip hop too, right? And it's like even
Yeah.
questioning that, it's like, well, and people will relentlessly be like, no, that's not coming off. But like everything should be questioned and changed and
Everything.
critically thought about. Do not say
Yes.
that you're pro black and you're not willing to question the structures that you oppress yourself with, even,
Mhm.
right? And the oppressive structures even within our own cultures, and that goes across the board. I agree with you, and like I think I've contributed too, and even to this day I'm not trying to say like now I'm perfect because I know everything. Again, it's ingrained in me. So even
Yeah.
sometimes when I speak to other people or other women, and like sometimes there's things that come to the tip of my tongue and I'm like, and again, like being spiritually mature too. It's like, call it the
Yes.
Holy Spirit. It's, you better not. You better not. No, keep your mouth shut and don't you say
Yes.
it that way. If I'm writing sometimes, and I think again, there comes a maturity where, like, yes, I would love to just express myself through my music sometimes and say it how I'm feeling it. But at the end of the day, I have a responsibility. My platform is growing. At the
Absolutely.
end of the day, like I think I am called to something. I'm called to be an artist. I'm called to other spaces as well, even within and outside of my artistry. And that comes with a responsibility. If I know better, I have to do better, even though I have the capacity to default at any given time, right? Or
Right.
make mistakes, right? But there's a level of self awareness that I think we need to have. And, people always talk about like, hip hop being one of the most influential genres and like black people being the most influential and blah, blah, blah. And all of these people will use these as copes for, relevance or superiority sometimes, or even just like to not be inferior, which is the truth. And it's a great way to get the point across. But don't say all of that and then not acknowledge that with great influence comes great responsibility. To whom
Yes.
much is given, much is required. If y'all
Yes.
are the most influential, then wear the crown that comes with it. It costs to be the boss. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're missing is a lot of black men, and we as a community sometimes have a very hard time with accountability and responsibility, but we don't have a hard time when it comes to crucifying celebrities that we put up on pedestals and platforms. And when they make
Mm.
a mistake, we act like it has nothing to say about us, but it does.
Yep. Yep. Because we're the ones who enabled it. We're the ones who gave them the power and the carte blanche to do a lot of the things that they do, whether
And it ain't
knowingly, unknowingly.
stuff,
You know what I'm
right?
saying?
People just want to like go with the okey doke. And like,
Mhm.
I don't think that's cutting it anymore. I think honestly, anybody who doesn't evolve and develop, whether you want to talk men, even outside of race, with gender wars, it's because it's survival of the fittest. People who adapt and evolve in any space that they're in are going to be on top. They're going to supersede everybody else, right? And I think there is a real distinction, light and dark, but also those who choose to be self-aware and develop themselves in the eyes of everything that's going on. And that goes with our people too. I think we're going to be left behind in a lot of ways, and if we don't actually develop and be self-aware and adapt with the times and the changes, I don't think that's going to get better for our people. And I think there's going to come a time, and I think maybe even now is that time, where we can't just blame it on racism anymore. At the end of the
Right.
day, call a spade a spade. You're just not self-aware and you want to adhere to stereotypes. You lack accountability and responsibility, and it's taking a toll both on the community and on you as an individual.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, oh, I actually got to pull my. There we go. So, my goodness, I mean, gems galore, just absolutely being
Your
dropped. Like, and I
questions are really great.
thank
They're
you.
such great segues to so many different things too.
I appreciate that. You know, I'd like to think my years of journalism experience are kind of paying off
Totally.
somewhere.
I would I would agree.
I appreciate that. Um, so the last question that I'm going to ask you,
Mhm.
this is more of a personal question.
Okay.
And it's based and I always, whether it's through your lyrics
Mhm.
or whether it's through what you say,
Mhm.
I always like to unpack certain
Mhm.
things that, people express. And I found this particular post that you put on Threads. I forget, I think it was maybe a week and a half ago when you put this up.
It was the weekend.
And yeah, so it this was powerful, what you said. Love, particularly in relationships, fascinates me. I don't think I can say I've witnessed or experienced unconditional love, unreserved acceptance, and emotional security. The idea of challenging someone with honesty within the bounds of trust is both exhilarating and perhaps unrealistic given human fallibility. Yet, how close can we come? This question fuels my art and creativity at its core, and I've just come to realize maybe all great art follows and has followed suit.
Mhm.
So, let's say things flip tomorrow
Mhm.
from this particular perspective. Things evolve and it becomes something completely different.
Mhm.
How prepared do you believe you are to handle the arrival of those things that you say you have yet to witness or experience from both a personal and a creative standpoint?
I think that's a really hard question to answer because, again, like with everything that I'm talking about and self development, I think this has just been like an ongoing thing for me, right? And I think, you know, knowing how much work that I've put into myself and to understand myself and to just do better and attract better and to have better experiences as a person. I think the best way for me to answer that question, honestly, AJ, is where I am right now and the work that I've been doing over the past couple years is so that I can be ready to take advantage of any opportunity that comes in my direction, creative, relational, any of that, right? I am operating right now to the best of my ability, to the highest of my capacity. I'm thinking, I'm praying, I'm in my word to the best of my ability. And so, whatever comes at me right now today, yes, I'm absolutely ready for it. I know where to go if I'm not. I know how to be discerning. I know how to seek God and seek the word of God and, hear when God is speaking to me. And I think those are the things that make me ready, not because I'm ready in my own strength, but because
Mhm.
I have the creator on my side to be able to seek his word and seek God in any moment possible. When you seek God and you pursue God, it changes the way that you love other people. It changes the way that you experience life and other people experience you, and it should. I think these are all things that are able to inform um, how you love another person or other people, how you lead, how you create, how your identity as an artist,
Mhm.
even. And so, yeah, like absolutely, I think I'd be ready.
Yeah, yeah. Like I wasn't even looking for a specific answer at all because I knew how deep that question could be or how many different directions it could go. But at the same time, I kind of knew that that was like going to be part of your answer, like the whole
Mhm.
thing of not operating in your own strength to be ready, but operating in God's strength to be ready.
Right, right.
Because if you're operating from that position of being with God, you have all you need.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's
So
for any experience, even if
yeah,
it's like absolutely devastating. And like you can say no, but like at the end of the day, I would just seek God and God's word on a situation, right? And
yeah,
I always say that's why it's so important to be also equally yoked in relationship, right? Because what you're praying about oftentimes God will also convict the other person, but if they're not walking in God or with God, then like how, right? Because we all have free will. So, um, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that is. I love that answer. Like from
Yeah.
front to back, because and not just the perspective of leaning not on our own understanding, knowing that God's ways are higher than our ways, but also the fact that I'm trying to remember what you said at the very beginning of that statement because it was so much. It's probably going to come back to me like maybe as we close. And if it does, I'll bring it back up. But I mean, just all of that, like I couldn't agree with you more, like all the way around. I think that's really the way that I kind of sort of look at it as well, especially when it comes to the things that we've experienced, maybe not necessarily getting a lot of those things that you mentioned or experiencing a lot of those things that you mentioned, but being prepared for it because you've been doing the self work on yourself. You've been in therapy, you've been with God. Like these are things that a lot of times people don't put in that time, they don't put in that effort to really just prepare themselves. It was the journey. You were talking about the journey. That's what it was. I knew it was gonna come back to me. The journey is really the preparation. You know what I'm saying? And in a lot of ways, you might not be ready right there, then and there at that moment, or what you think is ready. Because sometimes people, like you said, they will say, oh, you got to have this lined up, you got to have that lined up in order to be ready. And it's like, but does anybody really? You know what I'm saying? Like I think about myself as a parent. You know,
Yes.
I wasn't ready to. I thought I was ready. Like my wife and I, we waited probably about 5 years,
Wow.
bef- and we had our son 6 years into our marriage. And
Wow.
even waiting six
That
years into
helped?
our marriage, huh?
Do you think that helped a
Oh yeah,
lot?
it definitely helped. It
Amazing.
definitely because we were able to enjoy our marriage. We were
That
able to enjoy each other as husband and wife
right.
before we were able to share that love with our son, you
Yeah.
know. But
Mhm.
even with that, even with those 6 years before he came into the world, we still weren't completely ready to be parents. But we
Yeah.
had been prepared with my wife learned a lot about how to love me. I learned a
Mm,
lot about how to love my wife. And in those ways, because our son has so many of our qualities in common, we were
right.
able to learn how to love him because we could see different things in each other in him. It's like, okay, I have to approach him this way because this is similar to how I would approach my wife. You know what I'm saying? And
Right.
my wife looking at it the same way. Like this is how Joseph, I'm throwing my government out there. This is how Joseph, like this is how he moves in this space. I gotta approach Jason in the same way. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? So, but all of that is to say that we weren't completely and totally ready to be parents, but God
Right.
had been preparing us the whole time
Absolutely.
to be
Yeah.
parents
Right.
because his love was in us, and because his love was in us, we were able to love him. So
See, AJ, that's so good because even still, like the idea for me that I'm even talking about with you is like I'm submitted to something, right?
mhm.
I'm accountable to something. I have
Yeah,
accountability that's even godly accountability in my life, right? I'm submitted already,
yeah.
right? And so, like that to begin with, it's like I personally, I know a lot of people have an issue with that, but the way that I've even heard it through like even Christian women's podcast is like sub and mission. Sub means to get under, mission is to get under the mission. What is your husband's mission if that's the thing, right? So like
Right.
even with that, it's like certain things just start to come together with a different understanding, and that was always so hard for me. And like submission was a swear word almost. I have a degree in women's studies. I'm a
Yeah.
female rapper, right? Like I was, what does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just finding those people with the same values and being equally yoked. And I think again it just boils down to like God prepares you, but you also have to submit to that process and trust in God in that process too. And even in that process, in your relationship with God, it informs how you understand, perceive, and treat other people because of your relationship with God too.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. When I say this conversation was everything,
Was it like
and
top three or
oh yeah, absolutely.
really?
Absolutely.
Top three?
Like
I feel
no,
voted, AJ. I
I'm
feel
not
voted.
even gassing. I'm not even gassing you. Like seriously. This was like everything that I was expecting and then some from this conversation. It proved just even more why I felt like you had to be a guest on this podcast, cuz like you just left us with so many gems. I mean, like I'm just sitting here, my spirit is just filled, and like from a music perspective, from a spiritual perspective, from how we look at the world, how we view each other within our community as Black folks. Like there's so much that can be just pulled from this one conversation
Absolutely.
that it just proves
The
exactly
clip's
why
about to go
I'm so
crazy.
glad I shot my shot to get you on here.
The clips are about to go crazy. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely,
Thank you
absolutely.
so much for having me, AJ. Thank you for
I
sharing, holding space for me. Thank you for being open minded and for also being open to hearing me and not only hearing, but like seeing who I am as a person, you know, seeing past a perspective, even. And
Yes,
thank you for also trying to understand. I really appreciate that. And that's not something I
yes,
experience all the time. So thank you so much. And even just like the the depth in your understanding that's reflected in your questions. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for the cause even of your podcast, bringing back the love
absolutely,
conversations. It's needed.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you for sharpening me. Like I said at the beginning, you got to step out of one room where you're the smartest person in the room and go into another. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like somebody might be a little sharper than you and it's like, okay, all right, I need this. I need this to help me to grow, to help me to see things differently. You know what I'm saying? I'm
Like,
sure a lot of people are going to come from this conversation feeling the same way, you know.
thank you very much.
Absolutely. So, as always, with all of my guests, I give you the opportunity to promote yourself, whatever you have going on that you want to share with people. You have your music. Of course, you have also Dirty Chai Media in the background. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Like
it's
just
right
drop
now.
everything that you want to share with people, how they can connect with you, how they can listen to your music, all of that good stuff.
And you guys can find me on all of my social media platforms at ITS Q Benjamin. My music YouTube is Q Benjamin Official. And yeah, like there's a link tree on all of my platforms. If you use It's Q Benjamin, and you can find my music there. I sing and I rap. And I also have started a platform of my own that's kind of under construction, but there's a little bit of a start there that I have and a bit of a foundation. It's a platform that talks about faith, health, wellness, and life as well. So it's called Dirty Chai Media, and you can find the platform at Dirty Chai Media on all social media platforms as well.
All right. Well, once again, I'm grateful to you for this conversation tonight. And I'm definitely looking forward to having more conversation. You know, we're gonna be on threads heavy, as we always
We
do.
always do.
Absolutely, absolutely. So
Act
thank you
like
once
we never
again, my
left.
sister.
Thank you
All right.
so much, AJ.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll be talking soon.
Talk soon. Thanks so
All right.
much. Thanks for
No
having
problem.
me.
All
Okay.
right.
Bye.
Peace. All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, that was Q Benjamin. Great conversation tonight with her. And yeah, I hope y'all got just as many gems out of this as I got from her in this conversation. And of course, this is all surrounding my latest single that is out. This is actually the final episode regarding or surrounding this whole new love theme, something new. The single is currently out on all streaming platforms. And you can also bear with me one second as I pull up a little piece of the music. You can also get it on my Bandcamp page, which is ajthrowback.bandcamp.com, or you can also get it on my website, which is bammllc.net/music. Once again, ajthrowback.bandcamp.com or bammllc.net/music. So I appreciate everybody who's been supporting the single thus far. Definitely appreciate all of the buys, all of the streams, all of that good stuff. But y'all know me, I always promote, whether it's me or any other artist that I'm involved with, buy the single. You know what I'm saying? You see my sister, Q Benjamin, get her stuff, buy her stuff, support her. She's got great music. When I tell you Crosstalk, dope album, and she's got a whole bunch of other great songs on her platform, or on the music platforms. Definitely go support that sister right there. So next week we will actually be starting a new series based around my forthcoming single, which will be announced actually tomorrow. So y'all stay tuned for the announcement on that. If you're not already following me on social media, though, you can follow me at AJ Throwback on Facebook and X, at a.j.throwback on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And if you're not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, that is AJ Throwback 928. If you're here, I appreciate you for being here. Please make sure that you like, comment, share, and of course, subscribe to my channel so that whenever I go live, post a new video, premiere a new video, you'll be among the first to know. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in tonight for this broadcast of Bring Back the Love Conversations with your host, AJ Throwback. I hope that y'all enjoy the rest of y'all evening, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will see y'all next week for another episode of Bring Back the Love Conversations, where it's not just about bringing back the love conversations, it's also about bringing back tender love and care. Until next week, y'all take care. Love, peace, and happiness, all that good stuff, y'all. Peace.